7th, 2017 meeting of the Water Quality Management Committee will come to order. First item on the agenda, we note the return of Ron, and I hear the good health of your significant other.
Yeah, there's some, yes, there's some improvements. Good.
Oh,
Yeah.
we're very glad to hear that.
Everyone is amazed.
Everyone.
Yeah,
Great,
that's good.
great. Give her our best.
Thank you.
We're joined by our loyal legal lady.
Yes. Astray.
Astray from Quissit.
Astray.
And the Falmouth Enterprise. So, first item on the agenda, to discuss the draft scenario for achieving TMDL compliance in Falmouth Inner Harbor watershed. That was prepared by ASEA, sent around to the members of the committee earlier, and it will now be reviewed.
We didn't get. We got something, we didn't get any.
You didn't?
I didn't send around the
Oh.
draft because we just finished it.
Oh,
It wasn't 2 days in advance.
okay.
So we haven't been in the
stand
habit
corrected.
of sending this, we haven't been in the habit of sending them, we just go through them and then we send them afterwards, so. Everybody wants to have them. But now, so we've been going from estuary to estuary and we've turned the corner and here we are back at Falmouth Harbor. This is not the best, can we turn the light off
Yes.
maybe to get a better? Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you. This is Falmouth Inner Harbor right here. You can see there's a lot of development in the Queen Street and King Street area here, and there's also development on the other side. So Falmouth is sort of in the middle. It's a very, very busy harbor, as we all know, and it's got a lot of residential development all around. The watershed, interestingly, goes all the way up to Jones Pond and Saul's Pond, which is up Jones Road. But that's the upper watershed. That's this area here. And then the lower watershed is south of Morse Pond. So it's not a huge watershed. It's another one of those teardrop-shaped watersheds, the way Oyster Pond is. So what's very interesting as we try to look at nitrogen loading from different areas and different redevelopment, we've got one of the sub-watersheds, this Jones Pond sub-watershed, which is here, and you can see Jones Pond and Saul's Pond. You can also see it here in the Little Pond sub-watershed. So this sub-watershed contributes both to Falmouth Harbor and Little Pond. And it's important because their Atria, Woodbury, which is a huge redevelopment with a lot of nitrogen, was counted in both estuaries. And so when the MEP looks at particular land uses, it splits that Jones Pond sub-watershed, 42% goes into Falmouth and 58% goes into Little Pond. And as we do our hybrid approach with our counting of kilograms, this becomes important. But I just wanted everybody to see. Does everybody see which subshed I'm talking about? This one here, this is Saul's Pond, this is Jones Pond, this is Jones Pond, this is Saul's Pond, this is the Falmouth Harbor watershed, and this is the Little Pond watershed. So as you can see on this map, this is Little Pond here, and this is that 58% of Jones Pond that's actually going into the next watershed over. So we think these are going to be simple and straightforward, and each one of them has its nuances, and that's the nuance for the Falmouth Harbor plan. So we'd like to look at where the monitoring stations are. This one has 4 of them, with the Sentinel station conveniently labeled in the graph right here. This is north of, so this is
Falmouth Marine.
Falmouth Marina. And then right here, sort of north of the center of the estuary, is the Sentinel station. From a nitrogen concentration perspective, we see a familiar story. What I think is interesting about this is that there isn't really a place, even in, maybe here where you've reached the lower concentrations, but the whole basin itself is impaired, top to bottom, with the higher concentrations at the head as usual. Falmouth is is man-made, is very busy, and has a lot of land uses. So in some ways, expecting it to achieve swimmable, fishable water quality is a little ambitious. And the water quality kind of shows that. Although the dissolved oxygen is really high because of the Island Queen. and it's very funny because it's got the jet, so one of the things that the MEP comments on is there's great oxygenation because there's the Island Queen going in and out also a lot. So as is our habit, we look at the nitrogen loading and target removal, and when you do the math on this one, we look at about 625 kilograms per year that needs to be removed. So this is a modest removal requirement. It's not in the thousands as some of the estuaries we've recently looked at are. So it's in the hundreds. And we know from our look at other estuaries that most of the load is coming from septic systems, in this case 77%. There's a little bit from the golf course that's no longer with us. That would be the Atria, the Woodbriar golf course, but that's gone. And fertilizer and stormwater are the other two big land uses. So with all of that, we take a look at how do you remove 625 kilograms of nitrogen a year. We take our stormwater credit and our fertilizer credit, we get about 125 or so kilograms. So 25% of the fertilizer total is 57 kilograms, 25% of the stormwater total is 75 kilograms. And then looking at the potential for PRBs, this has not gone through the PRB working group, but just as much more of an illustration, and I'll show you a picture of where you could put a PRB that might remove that much nitrogen. But with that assumption, and then looking at Atria redevelopment, you would need not very many, 16 IA systems to actually get you to your target. I want to take a minute and explain how that 78 kilograms comes from Atria. In the MEP report, they say a number for how much nitrogen is coming from Atria. It's 159 kilograms. When we looked at Little Pond and did our targeted watershed plan, we removed all of the load from Little Pond because the Cape Cod Commission and other researchers of engineering showed us that it wasn't in the Little Pond part of the, Jones Pond sub-watershed. It's actually in the Falmouth Harbor. But the RUC system that was installed, we have actual water use data and nitrogen concentrations from Holmes and McGrath who did that engineering. And when you subtract the two, you realize that it's 78 kilograms less than what the MEP report said. So that is a calculated number based on a real redevelopment project. So we take the credit for that, and we take the credit for the fertilizer and the stormwater when we look at the PRB, and we still have 51 kilograms, which is a few IA systems. Let me show you the PRB again. This is just an illustration, and I'm going to use the pointer because I think it will be more effective. The pointer. I won't use the pointer because it's not close. So this length along Scranton Ave is 1,000 linear feet. And the big assumption here was just that the groundwater is going to be moving this way. It's quite possible that the groundwater moves this way. It's unlikely that it moves, southwest or southeast, sorry. It probably moves, would you agree with that, Virginia?
At some angle.
At some angle. But the point is you could move this length of PRB up here and capture about the same number of kilograms, maybe even more, because if it is angled, you'd be catching this whole area.
Somewhat higher.
Somewhat higher. Just when I was fiddling around with Watershed MVP, it's about the same number of kilograms, whether you're looking at that polygon or a polygon that's more vertical or more angled. So the 365 kilograms didn't seem like an unreasonable amount to be looking at. Of course, it would have to be ground truth with all of the methodologies that we know for well creation. And then the other thing I wanted to show are the storm drains. So the idea that could we get some significant improvement in stormwater. We have looked at both of these as part of the EPA grant a couple of years ago and have done, and actually gone out with EPA and looked at the catchment areas and looked at the depth to where these drains are. And the big issue was they're very close to the tide. I mean, if you look, this is high tide. So this storm drain that's right at the harbor master's office is half underwater at high tide already. So with sea level rise and other issues, this is going to be underwater, whenever sea level rises. So our thought was to go up to the area near where the farmer's market is, in back of the van shell, and actually redo the actual catchment area. This is all of the Queen Street, King Street area. It's 15 acres of catchment area that goes into that drain. So what we had envisioned is just putting a rain garden or something up in that area. And it seemed feasible to do. It was going to be more expensive than what EPA wanted to do for their demonstration project, so we didn't get funded for it. But nobody thought it wasn't a possibility. Same thing with Robbins Road, lifting up the storm drains, getting them up on the surface, and then catching that area upstream of where the existing discharge is, was the picture. So it seems like we've got some options for the storm drain, storm water, and for PRB. And I'll leave it at that and take questions. Probably sit there and capture everybody's questions.
Comments or questions from members of the committee? Steve?
Again, this is the first time I've seen it. But if you look at the PRB, it's taking out 365, and then 16 unlucky homeowners who are going to wonder how in the world they were chosen. Take out only 51. So the obvious thing is you make the PRB a little bit bigger and have 0 IA systems, or else you can get a doctorate in politics and figure out how to pick those 16 people.
The one's right on the water, of course.
That's right.
But that is a point well taken. I think part of it was to show how you could toggle it back and forth.
Right.
And that's why both of them are in the hybrid approach, is if you wanted to say that PRB length is crazy, it's too long, make it half the size, you could toggle up and have more IA systems. See what I mean? So,
Ron?
but I'm going to rate that.
I was just curious, when you showed the stratification nitrogen north to south or south to north of the harbor, at the Sentinel station, the concentration is about the same as the target in Little Pond. Like Little Pond's like 0.45, and that's like 0.5 or something milligrams per liter as a target concentration. So
0.35?
Yeah.
I'm going to pull it up.
Target is 0.45, but here when you showed that and you look at the numbers, it's very close to the Little Pond target already. So if we look at that kind of thing there.
So this is 0.54, 0.58.
Right, so you go down a little bit between the green and so it's like 0.5, it's like half a milligram difference between the two. The target for Little Pond is like 0.45.
Is it 0.45 or 0.35?
0.45
Okay.
or at least maybe a little more, but I think it's about that. So it's interesting that.
They have, they're considered, they're different.
Yeah, I know, they do them differently, but how they set those targets and things. Because I don't know, what is the target for,
I'd have to look it up. I believe it's the same as for Little Pond.
Little Pond, okay.
But they're not linear, so a concentration at the Sentinel station
Yeah,
doesn't really translate into a number of kilograms that have to be removed. In other words, Little Pond
well,
may have had a small concentration difference.
Little Pond I like from 0.8 to 0.45.
And we need
Yeah.
to remove 4,000
Get whatever
kilograms.
it was, yeah. To get
And
to
this one is
0.45,
smaller number and a
Yeah.
much smaller number of nitrogen to
Right.
be removed.
right, but it's just interesting how it's, I'm just saying, it's kind of close
Yeah,
in a way.
I think you're right.
So I'm doing this, it's just how they're different, the targets are even different for the different estuaries, they're not the same. But, and we're not talking about kilograms, we're just talking about the Sentinel
The
target
concentration.
that you're trying to hit, you know, it's not so much whatever it says.
So,
But it might be, that, you know.
Steve, John?
See, aren't some of the lower watershed sewered?
yes.
And,
Well-
Main Street.
Yes, right.
well,
And-
for instance, the big restaurant on the harbor is
The
sewered.
Flying Bridge is
Flying
sewer.
Flying Bridge is sewered.
Yes,
We pulled that in with its own private force main.
yes,
Harbor Master Sewer.
yes. That,
Right.
the
Some of those
the original
apartments-
sewer system went down to Queen Street, and then there were private force mains that were allowed to hook in within a certain distance farther south than that. But the MEP takes that into
Yeah,
consideration.
that's taken into consideration.
I mean, you would think about putting a few more on the sewer, but the limit at the discharge area stops even that, you know, since difficult to add more to the wastewater flow from the sewer.
Right, and the sewer was just in Scranton Avenue, which is the road just to the west of Winter Harbor. You have a huge area that's dense population, and.
So at the head of the harbor is Seward,
Yes,
all of those motels.
yes.
And then coming down the other side, the east side of the harbor, there's a bunch of that's Seward.
All the way to the Flying Bridge, right?
On the east side,
On the
That's a-
east,
no.
On the east
Oh, on the
side.
east side, sorry.
No.
stops at Jericho Path, I think.
Yeah,
It's not that whole east side.
No.
I would say it's only a small portion at the top.
that's exactly right. Yeah, Russell
Yeah,
Road,
it's-
Alma Road, places like that, but
Yeah.
it doesn't go down Falmouth Heights Road.
No.
I think it cuts off at Jericho.
Also, question, if you can go back to one of your first slides showing the watershed with the ponds. And this is really a question, and it may apply to a lot of our watershed. Yeah, that was good enough.
Is that a good one?
We often say and think that, well, the upper watershed doesn't matter as much because it's so far away that the groundwater will have gone through a lot of ground before it gets to the water. But when it goes, and we also say that ponds help denitrify. But one thing I haven't ever heard mentioned is when upper watershed groundwater goes into a pond and then gets into the pond stream system, it gets down to the estuary, presumably much faster than its sister groundwater that took the slow route via the ground.
No streams here.
Well, there
Well,
is.
no, there
There's-
are.
There's an
In
underground
fact, there's an
stream.
underground, you know that terrible flooding that
Davis
occurs at the
Straits.
corner?
Yeah.
That has to do with the
It's the stream.
connection
Yeah.
of Morse
Morse
Pond
Pond.
to the Falmouth Harbor.
Well, that part is true. That's right.
That's right.
But
Yes,
Salt's Pond and,
Right,
So
Jones
whenever
Pond.
you have one of those links, it's a shortcut.
absolutely.
yes.
Everything from Morse Pond
Yes.
has a
So
direct,
that land up there matters, those sources matter
right.
just as much as the ones down below.
Except they're also getting 50% attenuation.
Yeah.
So it's
but-
not quite, like if you put an IA system north of Morse Pond, you won't be getting as much value out of it necessarily as south of Morse Pond.
Right, but you have to take
Take that,
both factors into your equation.
okay.
So
Good point.
the Morse Pond School and that big retired nursing home
Nursing home.
are on the sewer.
They're on the sewer.
We put those on when we put Stop and Shop on.
Right.
And
So
also, there
does
was a-
that figure
That's a
in?
good question.
I'm gonna look that up. I'm
Was
gonna
that done before?
That was done when we did Stop and Shop. So that was a deal that Peter Boyer worked when Stop and Shop paid to hook up Morse Pond and that,
I'm
So
gonna
whether
go
it's
into the
reflected in the
spreadsheet. I
numbers,
know
very
that they included, I didn't go in parcel by parcel to see what they included, but they did include some. So when we come back with our update, that's what we do. We do the research and then say, okay, let's figure out how many of the parcels that are now sewered are actually included in the MEP and what the number is.
Can I ask about the road runoff? You talked about the possible benefit of doing the rain garden and all that. Haven't we already given ourselves credit for that?
Yes,
So if we don't do it, we're really adding to the load we have to clean up.
so the idea is if we're gonna take the 50-something kilograms of credit for the stormwater, they need to be linked to real projects.
Okay. Well,
So-
let me put it another way. Suppose we did that project, is there a way to measure whether we're getting more than 25%?
Yeah,
I mean, it's possible if you take that much and put it into a rain garden, this 25% is just a made-up number by the Cape Cod Commission.
yeah.
But we could come up with a real number that might be
So-
bigger.
another question. See, if you look at the upper harbor on the east side, those big circles, those are all
Condominium.
condominiums. And do they have, what have they got for septic systems?
The ones off of Jones Road?
No,
Or Falmouth Heights
Upper
Road.
east corner of the harbor.
just north of
The
the,
condos along Falmouth Heights Road.
South, the west side.
All
Oh,
those
yeah,
big
yeah, yeah, yeah,
circles.
okay.
In ground. Nobody's hooked up to the sewer. Right along the harbor there.
they just have, I mean, I can't ever remember us seeing Title V systems there. I don't know how that was handled when those were built and whether.
Let's just double check where the sewer ends on the east side, the Falmouth Heights side.
You had it right, it was Jericho. In fact, there's a condominium development right next to the boatyard on that side.
Outside.
Yep.
That just spent a lot of money upgrading the in-ground system, and they were very distressed to find that the sewer was not going to be close enough to help them.
And it was a Title V system,
Right, so they just had to put in a very expensive upgraded Title V system.
but it wasn't a nitrogen removing system.
So they might,
No, it doesn't help us, but
Right.
it also,
Yeah,
They were
it hurt
much-
them because they
much
wanted
happier
the
to
sewer
build the
brought
sewer.
to the,
well,
Yeah.
also, they obviously didn't need any variances because we never saw it.
Saw it, yeah.
Wow.
Also, in the paper sometime in the last year, there were some maps, I think, from the planning board of an incredibly ambitious scheme for the future of this whole area.
yes.
That was, it took me a long time to figure out where I was in Falmouth. It was so changed. I don't know if it's realistic, but,
you didn't notice the waterfront park before?
well, the fact that all of the Falmouth Plaza was disappeared and a number of substantial businesses disappeared.
Right.
But
Redevelopment.
aside from the amusing part of it, do we have to at least pay lip service to the fact that another named committee has certain ideas about that area?
I think it's a factor. As, the planning board, working with the Cape Cod Commission, is trying to reimagine the Davis Straits area, which is that, where the plaza is and the banks and,
Most of that area is on the sewer.
but a lot of it is on the sewer, that's correct.
So it would be a wash.
Yes,
It would no longer be on the sewer because it
That's
wouldn't
right.
be there.
right.
Any other comments or questions on this one? This is a really interesting one. You know, people think of Falmouth Harbor as the most severely impacted pond, but it really is not at all.
The sewer service area comes down about a third of the way down the harbor to the east.
On the east side.
Mhm.
About a third of the way, and then that there's a big block, and then, so it's about a third of the way down.
All right, any further discussion on this one? Thank you, Sia, for the usual good job.
I'm about to do another one. I just want
All right,
to
here
catch
comes number 2.
one note before
All
I,
right. Draft scenario for achieving TMDL compliance in Salt Pond watershed. Another interesting one.
20%.
Yeah, this one's even more interesting, actually. Salt Pond, there it is. Okay, Salt Pond. So here we have our aerial view. Again, Salt Pond on Surf Drive, off Surf Drive, a lot of development around it. This has a really interesting,
Yes.
I mean, almost sort of a head scratcher of a watershed.
Looks like a Calder mobile.
Huh?
Yeah,
Yes.
So you've got lower watershed here, and then you've got Bruce Pond here, and then you've got
Long
Long Pond, thank you, our water source. And then you've got this enormous watershed that goes way up into East Falmouth, that goes through, apparently, Long Pond, into Bruce Pond, and then goes into Salt Pond. So that's kind of, that's a question of, so where's the impact area that we really care about? Show you a couple of other things. So this is the lower watershed up to Bruce Pond. And then this, which is sort of the Woods Hole, you can't see it very well, the Woods Hole Road is like right there, or right here. The LT10, which is the less than 10 years of travel, the less than 10 years of travel time for the actual groundwater is that Woods Hole Road south. So you've got a lower part of the lower watershed, which is sort of like this part right here, that is the less than, right here, the line's right about here, less than 10 years of travel time, and everything else is more than 10 years of travel time. So that's a pretty long time, and if we believe anything about denitrification and groundwater, the upper watershed going through ponds and coming through probably has much more of a likelihood of removing nitrogen than this less than 10 years of drought event, which comes up later in the analysis. So we've got that factor. Here's the upper watershed, which is just huge and enormous from Long Pond north. So that's the northern part of the watershed. So the watershed is a little strange. The monitoring stations are close to the inlet on the other side and then in the deep basin. And here are where, this is the deep basin in here, and I have a map that shows that. And this is the inlet, and this is sort of what they call the channel. So Salt Pond has dissolved oxygen, and the dissolved oxygen monitoring is important as we get into some of the specifics of what makes Salt Pond different than most of the other estuaries we've looked at.
And see, is there a sentinel station in Salt Pond?
They don't really have a sense.
Yeah, okay, I'm just, yeah.
Because it's got two sort of separate areas, and you'll see. It's
Yeah,
that's
okay, yeah.
a fair question. Hold that thought.
Yes.
Here are the nitrogen concentrations, and as you can see, all of it, and you can't see the numbers, are in the 0.7. You know, the green is 0.7, and the yellow is 1. So high levels, high nitrogen concentrations during the monitoring period for Salt Pond. And bathymetry. You can see that there is a very deep submerged basin. So for those of us who are interested in the geology of the Cape, this is a submerged kettle pond. I
Yes.
mean, that's the story. This is not
This
a
is not
drowned
an estuary.
river valley. This is not a drowned river valley. The
Right.
entire South Coast really are they're drowned river valleys. This is a submerged kettle hole, and that makes it different in terms of its hydrodynamics, in terms of its functioning, and in terms of some of the other things. And so here are some of the differences that we pulled out of the MEP report. It's a naturally deep basin, it's more than 5 meters. That basin has sulfur, it's anoxic, it's got a huge stratification, it's got lots of soft sediments, and it doesn't have any benthic fauna. I thought that was very interesting when they did their benthic in fauna
None at all?
analysis. They didn't find any.
Wow.
It's
And,
anoxic as hell.
Hmm?
It's really anoxic.
Yeah, but,
It's really anoxic. And the other big issue in Salt Pond, and we actually brought this up last time we looked at this, is the circulation is really limited.
Yeah.
It's got this one tiny culvert under the road.
it's a shallow end,
And
too.
And it's the shallow end.
Yeah.
And it fills up all the time. And we see it, I mean, the backhoe's there all the time, right? And there's no eelgrass, which I guess is the next one, but there's limited fringing wetlands along the shore. So it really is a very different, so it's not a real estuary in what we've been looking at. So
But,
there's no history of
Yeah.
eelgrass, let me just get through these. And then, so dissolved oxygen becomes a really important indicator of health in addition to the nitrogen, but it's been anoxic since the 70s. So
Mhm.
it has, and we have these two monitoring stations. The one in the northern section, which is the deep section, does show some impairment in chlorophyll regularly going about above 10 when 5 is considered healthy. So you have big chlorophyll booms, but at the channel, in that channel area, you have supersaturated DO and algae blooms and a lot of death. So you have these cycles in the summer of really, really high DO, lots of photosynthetic activity, and then
Yeah.
nighttime die-off and depositional, basically muck creation. So those are some interesting system features. Then the MEP just kind of reverts back to its old, so what are the nitrogen sources and how are we going to remove the nitrogen sources? And of course, most of it's septic systems. We talked last time about the landfill not being really there, but it's such a small amount, we don't really need to
yeah.
say much about it. But they say septic systems and nitrogen, so when you do the calculations that we're used to doing, you find 1,200 kilograms. So if this were about nitrogen management, which it is not, you need 1,200 kilograms, which is a lot. But the MEP also then gives you these nitrogen calculations, but then says we're not going to focus on eelgrass. Even if you removed all the septic system load, they ran a model, you wouldn't get to estuarine health because circulation is still a problem. And so simply removing the nitrogen is not effective. And then they start to look at tidal exchange as being a way to complement the septic reduction. So they didn't calculate how much nitrogen the inlet removed. They didn't optimize it, and they didn't think about 2 inlets, which are all things that we've talked about. But when they did a modest inlet improvement, they saw total nitrogen concentrations reduced, but not to the point where it was a healthy system. So what we've talked about is looking at 2 inlets, improving the circulation sort of drastically, and thinking about the nitrogen, but thinking about it in terms of circulation first. So it's a complicated system. So it was kind of hard to do the nitrogen counting. And this is sort of, I would say this is more a starting point for discussion, because we'd want to look at inlet widening and we'd want to get some calculations for how much nitrogen the inlet would actually remove and what it would do, because as you recall, the hydrodynamic model that the MEP uses for prediction takes all of the circulation into effect. So we want to improve the circulation and then start thinking about nitrogen. So I think that would be the next step for this estuary, is to really drill into the inlets and what could be done to improve them. The good news is if you take some of our other credits, I put some shellfish in here because, as you may recall, a few years ago there was this beautiful natural set of oysters, and it was there last year too. So the oysters seem to do okay in a natural sense, so we can imagine enhancing it. So we've got some shellfish credit, we've got our stormwater and our fertilizer, and if we did that and thought about IA systems for the rest of it, you would have enough properties in that lower LT10 sub-watershed to actually get your nitrogen target. But there'd be no point fighting the nitrogen target and going down that road until you really did the modeling of how much circulation needed to be improved to make that nitrogen removal even worth it. So it's an interesting system and up for discussion.
Yeah.
I think we have to think about this one totally by itself.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
deep section is going to remain anoxic. The bacteria that live there, the phototrophs and the sulfur bacteria, are all nitrogen fixers. They're putting nitrogen into the system like mad.
Okay.
So the idea that we're going to take the nitrogen out of this one is just forget it.
It's a myth.
So we can fool around with the shallow areas and maybe the surface concentrations, but that deep basin is going to stay anoxic, and it's going to be a net source of nitrogen for...
Steve, is that right?
Well, just for the record, the idea of the second inlet was qualitatively different than just inlet widening, because the difference in this estuary is that it's parallel to the shore instead of perpendicular. So you can put another inlet that's further down the coast, and you can put some sort of check valve in one or both of them, which has been done successfully out in Wellfleet. I mean, these things exist. It's not just my crazy idea, they're commercial products that work. And then you actually get circulatory flow, which is totally different than just in and out with the tide.
Yeah.
In other words, you arrange it so that it always comes in one of them and goes out the other one. So you, in terms of flushing, it's qualitatively different.
Well, given the depth of that northeastern basin, John, what would it take to reduce it to hypoxia instead of anoxia and shut down the nitrification?
I think that's a losing cause myself.
Okay, I don't know. I don't have any idea what volume of water you'd have to move over what time frame, but if you could vertically mix that. Has anyone done salinity profiles in there too? Because my guess is it's stratified based on salinity,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Any wash of salinity in there is going to
Right.
sit and stay similar to what we see in oyster pond.
Right.
Yeah, and that's in
And
the
I just
MEP
wondered
report.
if you could upset that stratification to some extent to move it from anoxic to hypoxic and maybe change the biology of the bottom waters, maybe.
You say,
It's a real
so
long
mix,
shot.
so like a mixing.
Yeah, mix
to-
it, but not a big turbulent mixing, just a gradual thing, because you got a lot of surface area there.
Yeah,
And as soon as you have that gradient between the water and the atmosphere, you're gonna suck a lot of oxygen back into the water. And as long as, in addition to some horizontal thing, maybe you've got some vertical stuff going on.
right, so the whole idea is circulation is the first order of analysis here.
Ron?
I'm just gonna say, I mean, in that MEP report, it said there were no benthic fauna. and
Yeah.
that We're finding, there's sometimes paved with oysters on the bottom now, so it's sort of, depending on the
Well,
area.
I think you
No
need to
benthic
show
fauna.
where.
Yeah, no benthic fauna in the deep basin.
On the deep basin only.
Yeah.
Yeah, in that deep basin, that
And
fun.
this, you know, like, what Johnny was, he was suggesting about the valves, basically, and putting in check valves. That might do a lot for the shellfish, and maybe more of an oyster bed situation, since unless it really cleans itself up, because it's closed to shellfishing now, even though it's got oysters because of the high california level.
Yes,
So it may just be off.
but it's a great wildlife place.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So oysters are wildlife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They haven't been seeded.
I gather there's no submerged vegetation in the pond, there's no eelgrass or
No.
other stuff growing there, which brings up the issue of it's famous among birders for the extraordinary flocks of several species of ducks, that hundreds and sometimes thousands of scaup and other ducks are there, and I guess they're sleeping there, spending the night, resting, and then going out and feeding somewhere else. I had assumed that they were doing some feeding there, but it doesn't sound like there's anything there to sustain them.
Do you think all of this wildlife might be contributing? It's
Well, that's where I'm headed. I think while they're there sleeping or resting or whatever, they're still duckicating or whatever it is they do while they're floating around. And that could very well a substantial amount of nitrogen.
We're not gonna get rid of
We're not gonna put diapers on them,
Well,
but.
we're not gonna get rid of them either. We're not gonna open.
No,
the
we're
duck
not
head.
gonna get rid of them. I'm just trying to figure out how the system's working and what.
Yeah, no, it's really, it is
See,
really.
if you go back to the crazy watershed diagram, how does the water get there from this Cruz Pond?
Yeah.
Is there a stream? I mean, I've walked around there, I've never seen a stream.
There's no stream.
There's no stream.
Let's look at the whole one, there we go.
There we go. Okay. So when all these watersheds were done by both USGS and the Cape Cod Commission, they obviously had to account for every piece of real estate. And so the upper watershed really goes into Long Pond, and as we know, many million gallons a day come out of Long Pond. And only a tiny portion of Long Pond actually goes through Blues Pond. There's just sort of a sandy bar there.
Mhm.
And then in terms of groundwater flow out of Blues Pond, there's even less that actually ends up in this watershed. If you were to put the other watersheds in, it would go into the other
There's no
places.
stream.
Because there's not much development in the very part of the upper watershed, because there's a lot of mixing and a lot of withdrawal through Long Pond, I think any nitrogen counting, if you're beam counting, is basically zero in terms of what are we going to do with the lower watershed. The lower watershed, sections 1 and 2, are really, that's our focus. And the rest of it is there because they had to totally count for all the real estate within the town, but it doesn't really affect our planning for Salt Pond.
Thank you.
I mean, I don't think we can emphasize enough this, this really deep basin here and this shallower area here, and the oysters just kind of show up right here.
Show the bathymetry again, because
Yeah.
it's, there you go.
There you go.
Oh, so those are all the transects they did to measure
Well, it's
what the
15
depth is.
feet.
Yeah.
15 feet, I mean, so this idea that you could get some circulation going in here, you may improve the water quality there, and then, maybe think about some mixing in the deep basin.
Yeah.
Or maybe just let it exist as it is,
As
as a
it is.
submerged kettle hole, we're not really worried about.
Right,
from an impairment perspective.
There is one interesting thing with this slide that we haven't seen with the other slides. When you look at the outlet for an estuary, most of them are blue.
Yeah.
But this one has enough of an impact that apparently it's measurable as degraded water.
No, that's
Or no?
depth.
That's
Sorry.
depth.
No, that's
Beg
depth.
your pardon.
That's-
That's right.
No.
There we
That's
go.
nitrogen.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Which way
I'm
it
glad
shows
I'm
how
correct.
shallow it is.
Otherwise, there's
Yeah.
something really weird
Really,
happening in
that-
Vineyard
Yeah.
Center.
Yeah,
Exactly.
but it's
Okay.
really shallow.
We
We
Right,
probably have to
that's
kill the
really-
Well,
messenger.
the other thing is the volume of this is probably tiny for its area.
For its area.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's so
And-
shallow.
And the inlet is minuscule.
Yep.
So any substantial increase in flushing is going to have a big effect.
That's
Because
what
you're flushing a small object.
Right.
And then you might also consider running a culvert up into that deep area from the other inlet.
That's, and then when John Ramsey first gave the talk,
Yeah.
I thought of that too. And I was about to raise my hand. He said, before anybody asks him a question, he said, are there any engineers in the audience? And I was afraid to put my hand up. And he said, because within 30 seconds of my ending this talk, someone always says, for every estuary, why don't you run a pipe up to the head end and have a big pump and flush it through? He said, you'll never get it past Concom. Even though.
Yeah,
it would
never
work.
say never, right?
But
Yeah.
it obviously certainly would work.
A couple of points. The first European settler who settled in Falmouth settled right there, just to the east of this pond. So it's the most settled part of the town. Someone's been here since 1624
24?
or something
Yeah,
like
so
that.
it's pretty
It's
early.
pretty
Pretty
early.
old guy out there.
Yeah.
The other thing is that at the rate global warming and sea rise and the increase of storms is proceeding, we may not have to do any inlets here because
Maybe done for us.
God will do it, yeah.
Yeah. Good point.
It's, even now, whenever there's a storm, it overwashes that road.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yes, it'd be interesting to see if sea level were 3 feet higher, what would this pond look like?
Well, that's another place to talk to the planning board and the selectmen and so on, because they're, you guys know way more about this than I do, but a long time ago, there was a rule that if any of the stilt houses on Surf Drive were washed away, they wouldn't be allowed to be rebuilt. And then Hurricane Bob came along,
Yeah.
washed a bunch of them away, and magically the rule changed.
I think the rule was always kind of a myth.
Oh.
Yeah.
They were allowed to come back, provided they didn't have
They're all tight tanked.
in-ground septic systems. They had a tight tanks and,
And they could not be year-round, they had to be seasonal.
But-
and they had to be above the 12 feet.
But since this would be, what anything done here would probably be way in the future, right? You always said this was low on the list.
I would say this is a low priority, yeah.
Absolutely.
So, but planning for that means there's an opportunity to be alert for an opportunity for the town to purchase one of those properties, because otherwise there's no place to put another inlet.
Well,
The
that's-
town did that. After the last hurricane, they purchased several of them,
Yeah.
which aren't there.
Well, we should purchase one toward the east end. Because they can't go through the parking lot too well, because that's where that
No, we
high
own,
voltage cable to Martha's
we
Vineyard
own
goes.
several of them in amongst the ones at the east end.
Oh,
So we're ready.
oh, done?
All right, we're ready. Unless Mother Nature does it first,
All
right?
right.
Okay,
That's a very good point.
Any other comments or questions about these two water bodies? All right, third item on the agenda is to let you know the selectmen have been hearing from different town committees at their meetings, and they've invited us to come on the 18th. We'll have a slideshow sort of repeating what you've all been doing for the last half a dozen years, but I think everybody is invited and ought to be there, because it does turn into a general discussion. It isn't just a show and goodbye. So it'll be our chance to interact with the Board of Selectmen, and it's,
They haven't set a time on their agenda, have they?
no, and if they had, they
Yeah.
probably wouldn't hold to it anyway.
Yeah.
So we'll figure on being there
Well, there will be a time, but that's a good question. John, you have a Board of Health meeting that night, or you think you might?
I don't believe we do.
Okay.
We have one this next Monday and then not till January.
Not till January. And the other piece I would think that ought to be discussed under this agenda item is that normally that's the week where we would have our meeting. This is the third Thursday of the month. But if the presentation and discussion with the select, if there's nothing pressing, I think we might skip having the,
Or the 21st.
right, which would normally be on the 21st.
Do we could even make the selectmen's meeting, let's say that will be our last December meeting.
That makes sense. I won't be here on the 21st, so I couldn't, I've already
Okay.
written myself off for that meeting, so.
Cool.
I don't think that needs a motion.
No,
I'm just,
I'd say if nothing major comes up, we can do without the 21st.
Yep.
Maybe we will.
okay.
Okay, report of members and staff. We have Virginia on Bowens Pond
And
and Tom on
And stormwater.
You go
You want me
first.
to, I'll go first? Okay.
Pull up your slides.
Okay. Figure out how, every time it's a trap, trying to figure out how to get out of here. I'm gonna go stand at the lectern, because I wanna hold up this map and see if you'll just sit there and put slides when I yell you. Virginia and Sia and I and Amy Lowell met at the Falmouth DPW yesterday morning with Scott Schluger and Jim McLaughlin to get a general idea of what the stormwater inputs were to Great Pond. It's not an exact science. But in the past, the focus has been on regulating the quantity of runoff, not the quality. And this is going to be a new focus for us trying to do it. They gave us a rather amazing map, but of course keep in mind that all of Falmouth is mapped like this. This is Route 28 across the top up here, and Green Pond over to the left margin, and Great Pond right down the middle. And I guess we'll just go to the first slide. See, and I'll just stand over here. Perch Pond, as all of you know, is pretty heavily impacted, and it's also where we see the greatest number of let's call them focused stormwater outfalls. There's runoff, of course, all over the place, and I'll get back to this later. I'm going to return at the end to what's going on at the very north end of the T-Ticket path.
Tom, you'll need to hold the microphone.
Oh, right, good
Maybe
point.
set
Thank
down
you.
the map and,
Yeah, let me put this down since it's probably masking my presentation anyway. All right.
there we go.
Is that good?
Perfect.
Perfect.
Okay, see if I could have the next slide, please. This is off of Mara Vista, Mattapan, Milton, and Morris Streets. Scott had already gone through and flagged all the known structures out there, and if I remember the coding correctly, blue is stuff that's been ground truth. Was that the code they were using?
Right.
I think. So if it's bluing, but ironically, a lot of the new stuff of infrastructure to the new sewer lines and all were shown on this same map in purple. So I'm not sure we understood exactly the difference. But anyway, these were ones, and I don't exactly know their numbering system, but I went out yesterday afternoon after the meeting to ground truth them ourselves for the committee. And what you see here is what I found. The upper right-hand corner is the Mattapan outfall, and it looks like at some time in the past, and I don't know the details from the town, this is just what I found there. You can see a bunch of plastic or some sort of fabric held down with cobble-sized stuff. The actual drain pipe is up here in the underbrush. This is the end of Milton Street here, and I'm down near the water, and you can see that everyone on Milton Street takes their yard waste to the end of the street and dumps it. And you go, well, where's the outfall? Well, I stomped around in there, and right behind the pumpkin. There it is. See that little patch of green ivy up there?
Yeah.
That's where the pipe is. And so just note that, there's lots of leaves and a pumpkin to market. And then down here at Morris Street, again, some ivy, and in the middle of, I think it's probably Phragmites. I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to what was going on. There's again a little pipe here with a lot of leaves and stuff around it. And keep in mind, this was yesterday afternoon. Tuesday night, we had a pretty substantial rain. I meant to look at my gauge, but I think it was it close to an inch in that really heavy downpour? And notice, nothing in front of any of these outfalls looks like it's been disturbed, which kind of surprised me.
Right.
So this is a great unknown. We don't know, is this episodic? Is there once every 2 or 3 years some amazing gully washer that floods the catch basins to the point where we get a significant outfall from it? We don't know. And I would say, looking at this, that probably it's not a regular occurrence. Because like I said, we had a pretty good rainfall Tuesday.
The drains are clogged.
Well, it has to go if it doesn't come out here, then it's, well, that certainly happens with the ones that are full. But these aren't, I don't think these are necessarily a good indicator of water flow into Great Pond because of what we see here. Now see if I could see the next slide. This is at the end of Randolph Street, and it's that big steep bank, and this is that, is it called Great Bay Road?
Yes.
Yeah, Great Bay Road that's been an ongoing thorn in the side of Falmouth DPW. It's eroding, it's closed, and everything else. But there's the outfall pipe there, and of course, in this case, you can't tell whether a lot of water had poured out of it recently or not, so I didn't try to do anything. This is the end of Reynolds Street, which is a private street. I meant somehow I didn't get the map up here that shows the location. I can get back to it later. But anyway, this is broken off, and I don't know whether there used to be a catch basin. There's no catch basin on Reynolds Street on the town map. So I almost wonder if there was a catch basin out here at some point that has since been collapsed and eroded away. Since it was a private road, maybe it wasn't built to proper specs. But obviously there's no indication of any water coming out of that one either. And the next slide, see ya. T-ticket path in Route 28. I'm guessing this is the really big input to the top of into Perch Pond. Route 28 is right here in the upper left-hand corner. Notice the 20-foot contour here. I was here yesterday at high tide, 2 inches of freeboard.
Yeah.
Literally 2 inches of freeboard. I was really surprised that there are paved streets in Falmouth that essentially, so here's a shot looking back uphill. This is Route 28. There are no catch basins this whole run, and then there's water coming off of 28, which is state regulated, so we've got an intersection of regulatory powers there. Right behind me to the left is a large catch basin. I could find the manhole covers, but I couldn't find the outfall. It's a terrible morass in there. But my understanding is an awful lot of water comes off of there. This road here is Norris Path. It's paved, broken pavement, this first little run up here, and then it's dirt all the way back up to its intersection with Route 28. And you can see from the contours here, this is very steep too. So, and no catch basins because it's a dirt road. So a lot of probably sheet flow on the surface comes down there. So this is high on the list. I don't know exactly. Their Falmouth DPW this is on their list to try to do something about it and intercept more of the flow. During the meeting, it occurred to us there might be something that we could do with some cooperation from the state. See if I could have the next slide. Right here, this is T-ticket path again in Route 28. There's a very deep swale. And I thought, wow, if we could vegetate that and use that as a retention basin and somehow convince the state, the flow here is on 28, the high point is right about here, and the high point over there is up around Falmouth Motor Car, somewhere beyond where I can point right now. If they could redirect that water across 28 and into that hole, maybe it could help a lot with whatever's going into Perch Pond. I mean, these are unknowns.
Could you identify the street names? They're a little hard to read.
Oh, yes, this is that Norris Path,
Okay.
that unpaved road. Here's T-Ticket Path
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
Homestead Lane,
Okay.
Broken Bow Lane.
Broken Bow, okay.
Broken Bow.
Yeah, Broken Bow,
Yeah.
and you can see it wraps around that,
Right.
that swale, and it's quite deep, and it seems to be dry in there right now.
Yeah.
And it's already vegetated.
Yeah, and it's already vegetated too.
Do we
I
know
don't
what's in there?
know. I
We're
didn't do
going
that
to
kind of
find
research,
out.
but I'm just looking, we're sitting there yesterday in the meeting, and I'm looking at the map,
We're
and
going
here's this little void over there, and I said, boy, you know, if we could intercept this water, I don't think we'd ever get the state to let us take water from here and move it back there, but there's a lot of water that comes down 28.
There is.
I think we should add that the engineering, Scott Schluter, indicated that he was going to calculate that particular watershed so that we get an idea of just what the volume was off Route 28.
Right.
And if all of those catch basins along 28 are connected, and the water is then piped down T-Ticket Path, it could be piped across the street instead.
Well, there are other big wooded areas there too. There's sort of a crescent, concave downward, no, down at the bottom of your picture.
Oh, here,
Well, yes, there and all the way over to the right. See, it's a wide, it's a long.
yeah.
And those houses
And
have cut
steep.
their, well, I don't know if it's a
Well,
hill or a valley.
no, if you look at the contours on the left.
Oh,
yeah,
I
see,
think it's because it's so steep.
See how steep this is?
And the houses are built at the foot of the hill.
Oh, you're probably right, okay, yeah.
At the top of the hill. This is
also-
high ground here. This
also.
is 29 feet here.
Top of it.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
Top of the hill.
And, yeah, those are flagged there. That's a 24-foot contour there, I believe. It's this close to it, my eyes get kind of... So, anyway, that was pretty
Very good.
much what I saw. I don't know exactly, as I said, my guess is from looking at the outfalls. Oh, there are other outfalls. Is there one more slide, or is that the end of it? No, I'll refer back to my map then. I guess, can you turn the lights up, Ron? A little brighter here.
It's upside down.
Maybe if I hold it like, oops, I've
upside
got it
down.
upside down, all the water's gonna run out of the great pond if I'm not careful. The other outfalls that Scott flagged were two here on Shorewood, which I drove down to, but I'd have to walk through people's yards. These others are all at the ends of right-of-ways of existing roads, so it was easy for me to walk down and look at it. The way to look at these probably would be from a canoe or a kayak, go and look at them. There's another big outfall here off of 28, right beside the bridge, the Coonamessett River. And it was so
Dense.
overgrown and dense that I didn't get down in there to see what was going on. And there's one on Perch Pond Circle right here that I didn't get to because, again, it looked like private property. I didn't want to get out. So, questions,
That's
comments,
terrific.
Eric?
That is terrific.
Yes, thank you for ground truthing. It was certainly very helpful, meeting with the engineering department, and they're interested in input. And this is a piece, if we're looking at the Great Pond watershed, we need to look at stormwater as a piece of that.
Absolutely. Good. Any other comments or questions from members of the committee? Or from the fourth estate? Okay.
Okay, so I had a brief report on Bourne's Pond on the permitting process. It's ongoing and it's slow, but it is making progress. The close of the comment period for the Corps of Engineers track of permitting was just after Thanksgiving, and so we have the full universe of comments now. And most of them from the state agencies were certainly things that we could work with. EPA had no objections at all, which is wonderful. And the abutter sort of resubmitted the information that he had been concerned about, that he had presented to the Conservation Commission, and that's already on file with the DEP. So those processes are going forward.
Okay. Any questions or comments about Bowen Pond? All right, I'd like to bring to the committees and the public attention that Ken Foreman's a group of graduate students who come to town each year and do research projects, some of which have been very helpful to us. They're doing a show and tell on the 15th at the Lilly Auditorium from 8 in the morning till 2 in the afternoon. And as many of us who could go should go. I'll send around the agenda to the members so that you can.
Ken sent it, I think, to all of
everybody
us.
got it?
Oh,
Is there-
fine.
Okay, I didn't see it yet.
He might not have everybody's email, so I
Okay, we'll
think
make
sending.
sure you get it.
Yeah.
So
When on the 15th?
It's
15th.
Friday morning.
Okay, minutes of the prior meeting, they were sent around. I have to ask now. Everybody got them?
Yep.
Any additions or corrections? No?
I'll
Very good.
move that they be accepted as presented.
Moved and
Second.
seconded that they be adopted as presented. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And
I'll abstain because I was
two
not.
people were not here, they should abstain. Okay. A motion to adjourn will be gratefully accepted.
So moved.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Vote. The ayes have it. We are adjourned.